Tonight, Dan has a lot to share with us, and so I will try to keep my introduction brief. Tonight's special guest is historian Dan Gibson. Dan and his wife have lived most of their lives in the Middle East. Among others, they've lived in Jordan, the Emirates, as well as Yemen. Dan's fascination with the lands of the Middle East, its people, and its majority religion, Islam, led him to begin following clues from history and archaeology about the religion of Islam and its origins. Much of what he has learned from his research has been compiled into his book, Let the Stones Speak. I'll just get a copy here. There's a couple of copies available for sale if you want it tonight. I'll let Dan explain more if he wants to. So it's been compiled into this book, as well as into a documentary on YouTube called The Sacred City. So if you go on YouTube and type in Sacred City, you should come up with that. It's about an hour-and-a-half documentary, which would kind of compile his, I wouldn't say all of his findings, but a lot of it, right? A lot of conclusions anyways. So tonight we will hear about his findings and conclusions. And while his findings do focus on Islamic history, it should be a subject of interest to both Muslims and Christians alike. We hope this evening will facilitate dialogue between the faiths about historical beginnings, as well as gaining a better understanding of a topic that has been underrepresented in some of our discussions between each other. Ultimately, we are here today to reason and to think together. So to that end, we will reserve the last 30 minutes of our time together for a question and answer time. So you'll have the chances to ask Dan some questions at the end, and he will do his best to answer them or to get back to you, I think, if it's something pressing. If you desire to contribute financially in any way to the cost of this event, we have a donation box at the back there, a little wooden box there. There's no pressure at all, but just if you care to, the box is there. So with no further delay, I just want to welcome Dan to our meeting tonight. Welcome, Dan.
This is on. I look at our sound guy. Can you guys hear me? Okay, we're on. I switched it. Okay. Watch me take it out of my pocket, and all the wires will come out, and it'll stay in there. And
I think you're on now.
Oh, am I on now? I'm just going to put it right here. Okay. I moved down here because I don't have any notes. My notes are the PowerPoint, and then I realized if it's behind me, I'm going to get lost. So thank you for inviting me to come. It's good to be here. Let's go to the next slide, and I have to tell him because he has to click it. So a little bit of background. I mean, we lived in the Middle East for many years, but in around the year 2009, I had been studying lots of things, and one of the brothers I know who was up in Syria, he wrote me an email, and then he called me with tears, and he said, "You've got to research this, what you're finding, and you've got to publish it." And I'm like, you know, it's too big of a topic. It's huge. Don't know if you ever scratch the surface on something and you realize, oh my, this is a big topic. So I put it to the Lord, said, "Lord, if you want me to do this, there's a couple things you've got to bring together. One is where I was teaching in a college in BC, I need to be able to step out of this. So you've got to provide another teacher. And second, you've got to provide a house because I don't know if we lived in the housing from the college. I don't know if I have enough money to be able to step away." And so the Lord did that for us over the next couple of weeks, actually. And suddenly, and I won't go into the long story, but a surprise gift came to us. Out of the blue, a man who we knew had met there in BC gave us a check for $20,000. I mean, just blew me away. And like I said, I said, "I can use this now. Do you mind if I use it to live on it for the next year or two?" And and supplement what money I have. And he was like, no, you go ahead. I want you to do this project. So suddenly, and a new teacher, a guy applied to the school for my position, and they hadn't even advertised it. So it's just like he fit everything they needed. So it was excellent. So I got out, and so 2009, I started writing, and I knew there was a problem with the Qibla directions in Islam. And so I wanted to study that, but I was afraid to. So what I did is I wrote a book on the Quranic geography, the geography of the Qur'an. Okay, like we have biblical geography. So as a Christian, I'm growing up, I was very aware of archaeology, of the Bible, and of ancient history. And so I would like to do that, go through the Quran and find all the places that are mentioned, and then write something up on that. But I was also aware that I was working on the problem of the direction towards Mecca, and so that was tucked in the back of the book, and I didn't realize that it really touched a spot, and all of a sudden people were reading it and talking, and so I thought, okay, I've got to go into this more. And so believe it or not, that was 2009 we started, and I'm still working on stuff. But this year we wrote the book, the final book. This is the third book about this, and this is the final one. I am not going to write another book. This one about killed me. I am not an academic. And so when I set out to start this one, I'm like, okay, God, if I'm going to write this book, you have to provide somebody to help me. And lo and behold, my nephew needed a job. He's a copy editor in an academic circle, and I said, and he came, and I said, look, I can only hire you part-time. He said, I can only work for you part-time, but, and so he started, and he was the best thing that ever happened to me. He just wrote source, source, all over the place. And so I had to, he sat at a table, I sat at two computers, and we just went at it. And it was great fun. For a year and a half, it took us to work through all this. And I thought I knew all my stuff, and it took a year and a half still to write it. So we wanted a book that you can check everything we say. Let's go to the next slide. Go back for just a sec. You can see we did the book Early Islamic Qiblas, the film The Sacred City. I have some copies on a memory stick if you would like some. I wouldn't mind $10, but if you didn't bring any money, you could take. I've got like 5 or 6 copies there. Also, The Sacred City was then translated into more than 20 languages, and so that's been going around the world, and people have looked at it. And then I started YouTube videos because I said I need to have more eyes looking. I was very fortunate to stumble into an academic group earlier on and had 40 people who were studying Islamic history that were willing to be eyes for me looking at my part if I was willing to be an eye for all their PhDs or masters thesis that they're working on. So we're all aware of what each other were doing around the world, and all just being eyes so I could write and say, hey, have you looked at this, or what about that? And so it just helped with the research. So that was good. I wanted Muslims to respond to this, what I was finding, so that they would go. And I'd say, go out, go to your villages and find the oldest mosques, and then check them out, write to me, where are they? Send me a GPS coordinate so I can look down and see what you're talking about. And I will look for the archaeological reports, and we'll try to put everything into a database. And so then I had a website we improved. Now we've done Let the Stone Speak. I'm hoping there'll be one more film. It'd be nice if we can get one more film. Let's keep going. We're going to have to go fast here. So. Next slide. Warning, this may get a bit technical, and I may disagree with what you've been told or what you know about Islam. So I meet all kinds of people. I meet lots of Christians say, oh yeah, I've read all kinds of books and all about Islam. And I'm going, oh boy. Because a lot of the books that are out there, they're popular, they're everywhere. They've never had somebody challenge them on what they put in the books. That's why you need a copy editor to come along and say, I want a reference for everything you say. Prove this point to me. Show me where it is. And so I just need to be careful of a lot of stuff that's out there. I'll go fast. There's a lot to cover. will not go into depths. There's not enough time. And if you don't want to download this book, you can get it at nabatea.net. I will put it up, I think, later. If not, you go to my website, First thing on the top is Let the Stone Speak. Click on it, download the PDF, it's yours. It's free of charge. We're not trying to make money, I'm just trying to get the word out. But books cost money to print. So if you go to Amazon, Canada, and want to order this book, it's $120. So I have 2 copies tonight that I can go for $50 because I get all the discounts. Amazon doesn't get nothing on this. They didn't even know we printed this here. So anyway, I've got 2 copies that can go cheaper tonight if you're interested. Okay, why archaeology? Why are we going to talk about archaeology, and why are we going to talk about archaeology and Islam? And I want you to note that we will talk and use references to the Islamic calendar here. So if you look at this timeline you see across the middle, you can see that on the left we have CE dates. This is the common era. This is what they commonly use instead of AD. So I'm using CE. Above that there are AH dates. AH means after the Hijrah. So when Muhammad started preaching, at a certain point they all emigrated to Medina. And so in Medina, that's where the Islamic calendar started, and that's where we date things back. It's a very helpful dating system for the first 300 years. Because if you're looking at things, and the date is 67 AH, 67 years after the beginning of Islam. But if I went and told you, it was, 694 or something, I mean, like, what? When? How do we relate to that? So that's why we try to use both dates. Now, this is a timeline. What we know about Islam comes from manuscripts. We can go back and read early writers and early Muslim writers. When I say early, that's in quotation marks, because there's a problem. As you look at that, I've got some of the major books, not yet. We're not going up there yet. As you look at those books, you will see that in the first 200 years of Islamic history, there are no manuscripts. There is no eyewitness from those first 200 years. All the eyewitnesses are 200, 250, 300, 350 years later are the people who are writing about early Islam. So there is a problem that there is 200 missing years that are there. Oh, the Muslims were busy. They were out conquering and going places and doing things, but nobody was writing down nice, comprehensive history of everything that's going on. And so when we come along as archaeologists, almost everybody that I know who studied Islamics studies these books. And so that's what I did. I had to end up looking at the hadiths and the histories and all the other stuff to understand Islamic history. But I had a question because I was living in the Middle East. I was in all these different countries. And what about archaeological remains? Now, that should tell us a story too. And they should match together, I would expect, what they wrote down and what's there. So now you can click it up. Because when we started studying, and one of the things I did was to very simply look at the directions mosques face. It's called the Qibla, and we'll explain that in a minute. But at the beginning, we started a database. Nobody had put together a database. I started asking and looking. Nobody had a list of all the earliest buildings. I said, well, I will start. And so for the last 20 years, I've been working on this database. Other people, scholars have joined, other people have joined, and we're trying to put together all of the remains of all the buildings built, all the mosques, our places of prayer, in the first 300 years of Islamic history. And we've now uncovered about 280 buildings that are in the database. There's a few from a little bit after because they're kind of fascinating. They're a little different, but we're looking at those earlier years. What surprised everyone, and this is where we're going to start because the database is very important, is that all of the existing places of prayer that are still survived to now, all of them at the first 100 years, not first 100, but at the beginning, first 70-some years of Islamic history, all faced the city of Petra in southern Jordan. Every mosque. Now, we're going to get to that. But then we have some, the next one is what we call the parallel ones. These are in North Africa and Spain, and they point off in a different direction, all of them at that time. Then a Mecca mosque appears and a between mosque, and we have places, and we'll look at this in a minute to explain what we mean by between. So there were all these different places of prayer that were built back at that time, but there very few were facing Mecca, and Mecca wasn't the original direction that Muslims prayed. They prayed in a different direction. That is shocking, because today Muslims will tell you we face the city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia. There's a mosque there called Masjid al-Haram, and we face that place, and the black rock happens to be there in the side of that building that's there, and that's where they face and pray. But when I look at this, you'll realize that none of the first four caliphs who started and were part of Islam, none of them, according to archaeology, faced Mecca. And in fact, I don't think Mecca existed during their lifetime. Something happened, something changed. But this is the archaeology. Let's keep going. We're going to break this down for a minute. What is the Qibla and why is it important? In Islam, they have a sacred direction, something we Christians don't understand, because you don't have a sacred direction. If I was to ask you, what direction does this church face? Do you know? Would you care? It's not part of our thinking. Now, some Eastern churches, in the Middle East, were built facing east because Jesus was going to come back. And so a lot of graveyards face east, and so that was because if Jesus comes back and will be seen in the eastern sky, it says, therefore, you want to be facing east. So, welcome people from a long distance. Okay, we've just started. The sacred direction. And so that means when you pray for a Muslim, he should face the sacred direction. It's fun watching Muslim families teaching their kids to pray. And, what's the first thing you do? And they're like, well, you get out the prayer mat, and then you stand here, and the dad goes, whack. No, what's the first thing you do? He said, you got to find out what's the right direction to pray. Now, you have a problem here in Calgary and in Canada because is it the closest? I mean, you got to go over the North Pole somewhere to get there. And that wasn't the thought at the beginning, and we're not looking at Calgary. We're looking at the first years of Islam. And so prayer is important. Now, they go on pilgrimage. It says you should go every year to Masjid al-Haram on pilgrimage. So where was that? And that's your sacred direction. It's the same direction as what you pray. You're facing towards that holy spot. And when you do halal meat, you see halal meat everywhere, you need to take the animal, turn its face to face in the sacred direction, and then cut its throat and say Bismillah and so forth. So the sacred direction affects everything. It affects how the mosque is constructed, because the mosque has a front wall called the Qibla wall, and that wall faces the holy direction. And so when men come in, you'll see them there. They line up in a long row. This is very important. Christians, often our old Christian churches were very long and deep because we couldn't bridge a big thing. So they were long and deep, and you have all those little, you ever see Westminster Abbey during the wedding of the kings and queens and stuff? You see it's very long and deep. A mosque is totally different. It's wide because the whole idea is you stand shoulder to shoulder with you, and they go through exactly the same actions, doing exactly the same words. It's memorized, and they know it, and they repeat this all the time. And so the construction of a mosque means when we go to a mosque, I need to discover what is the Qibla wall, and that depends a bit on when it was built. Because the earliest mosques had nothing. It was a plain wall. There was no mark. There was nothing on it. It was just the Qibla wall. That's the direction they faced. Eventually, and it's interesting that it comes when there was all this Qibla confusion and everybody sort of all facing in different directions. They started to put a mark on the wall. And some mosques have a mark on the wall there, and they have another one in the corner because they have two Qiblas. These are called Qiblatain mosques, mosques with two Qiblas. And so you could go and you had the option of which direction you wanted to pray. I don't know if they did it in the same service or if there was two services. We don't know. But so all of this is called the Qibla. Keep that word in mind, because we're going to talk about Qibla all night long. Okay? That's the holy direction. Next one. The expectation is that all mosques should face Mecca. Our project was, Do all the mosques from the first 3 centuries face Mecca? There's my website, nabatea.net. Click us again. We have a tool online, and if you go to that, it's called the Qibla tool, and you get about 280 mosques, all the dates, and where they are and the GPS coordinates, and you can zoom down on them, and you can click for more information, and we have a page on each mosque telling you the story, and we have the references where you can go to get the archaeological information and everything. It's all there. But when you look at that, you go, what in the world is going on? Those are the first Qiblas. And they all are kind of facing all over the place. And so we're going to take it apart. What we had to do is go back and look at dates. Because if you separate it by dates and then separate it by groupings, you begin to understand. So let's keep going. There are 6 Qiblas, 6 directions people prayed. Petra, Mecca, the between, the parallel, Jerusalem. And then I have unknown because we have mosques, and in our database we have mosques, and we have to mark them as unknown. Some of them are big, beautiful buildings, but they were built, last 100 years, and they completely eradicated the original building, so I can't tell. It's unknown what direction this mosque originally was. So I have to mark it as unknown unless somehow, someplace, somebody comes up with something earlier. The Qiblatain Mosque in Mecca is one of those where when they tore it down in the 1960s, an architect went down and made some sketches. So that helps us know what was underneath, but we can't go look at it. But in the Middle East, most of these mosques still exist. Many are in use, and many others are just the foundations or the rocks that are there. You can go and visit them. So let's keep going. What's coming next? Click it. 68, face Petra. So 68 of the mosques face the city of Petra in southern Jordan. And they're from all over, and we could have discussions on each of these and where they were, but from north, south, east, and west, mosques all face. And so what we do is we accept a 10 degrees of error on a mosque. So if they're trying to build a mosque, they might be out a bit. So give them 10 degrees of error. If it's more than that, I mark it as unknown if it doesn't fit any of the other Qiblas. So we had to give that margin of error, and so we've got it down to what's in that 10 degrees. So we have 68 of them most of this during the first 100 years of Islamic history that faced the city of Petra. And that has created an uproar. A lot of people are like, that cannot be. This is just, I explain, this is as radical to them. Now, some of them say it's like a nuclear bomb going off. It's absolutely not possible because they have been told for generation after generation after generation, everything faces Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And when you do the archaeology, it's like, no, the first guys didn't pray in that direction. And this creates theological problems as well, and historical problems, and just all kinds of things. So we'll just do that. Let's keep going. Petra. That's down close at Petra, so you can see all the lines coming in. We drew a circle around, and it's in that circle. And so we have 68. They're in that circle. You can go on the internet to my website. You can click on the Qibla tool, and then you can look at all of this stuff. It's all there. You can group it in all different ways, and we tried to make it graphical so people could see. Let's keep going. Okay, there is the parallel Qiblas. Look at North Africa and Spain. There are mosques, and they're not facing Mecca at all. So how do you explain that? You've got to figure out what's going on. And so I learned, I had to go back and find the earliest of these mosques that faced that way and try to figure out who started this. Like, why would they start it? And why would they take mosques and not face towards the city of Mecca? So let's just keep going because we'll get there. How many? We'll go back. It was 42, I think, of those that are faced down that way. Many of them major mosques in the middle of big cities, ancient mosques. Okay, next one. There are no Mecca Qiblas in the first century of Islam. So for the first 100 years, that we have not found any record of anyone facing Mecca in Saudi Arabia. But there are 28 mosques in our database because they started later. And so after, more than 100 years later into Islam, suddenly we have the first one that appeared. And we had to look for a long time. I used to say a certain date and a mosque in Pakistan was facing that. Well, we've now found some more, because as we dig through, we found some in Syria the date earlier, and mosques built by caliphs. So this is important mosques, and we're back down to what we think is the very first one. So that's Mecca. Let's keep going. There are what we call in-between. Now, and there's a story behind this, and we'll hopefully get to this, but the in-between mosques are called the wasat mosques. This means the middle, or the between. And the very first one was called the Wasat Mosque. And where did it face? Between Petra and Mecca. And it was during the lifetime of one man, over 40 years, 61 mosques were built, because he was second only to the caliph. And so he controlled Islam. And so we can go back and study the guy who did this and why he did it. But his mosques all face between the two. And even from the south going up, facing between positions. Let's keep going. Okay, Jerusalem. Everybody said, they used to face Jerusalem. That's what they tell you, but we've gone back to look, and that's not the case. The first mosque did not face Jerusalem, not in the first century. Not even in the second. I mean, they're starting at the end of the second century into the third century. There's a couple. There's only 7 early mosques we found that face Jerusalem. And most of those are very late, and most of them have very interesting stories about the guys who built them, because they only did this after Bukhari told them that they used to face to, and it doesn't say Jerusalem anywhere in his writings. He says Asham, the north, or even to Damascus, or however you want to translate that word. The Islamic record never says they face towards Jerusalem. That is not something that is in early Islamic records. And I can have lots of disagreements with imams and other people, but it's like, go back and read. What does the word say here? But they're so used to it, so ingrained in their system. Muhammad first prayed to Jerusalem, and then he changed it on this date. And it's like, show me the archaeology. I've got mosques from that period, and he's not praying. Nobody's praying to Jerusalem, and nobody's switching and praying over to another mosque in Mecca. It just doesn't happen. It's not in the archaeological record. A different story is. Let's keep going. Okay, unknown, as we explained. So on our database, we have 76 unknown. Many of those were rebuilt, or they're just too far out. They're more than 10 degrees out, and we didn't want to include them as data and guessing where they were going. We just said these are, and in statistics, if people do statistics, and I asked one of the guys who was doing it, I said, I've got these unknowns. He said, I'm glad you do, because if you had got every one of them nailed down, I wouldn't like your statistics, because you got to have margin of error and different errors. So anyway, 6 qiblas. Let's keep going. Any questions so far? Just about qiblas. I'm hoping there's not, but if you have a burning question, this is a chance to address it at this point. Okay, because this is the data, and I had lots of reaction against me. Everybody was upset with me. Everybody was upset with what I wrote and what I was saying, and so lots of feedback coming back. But interestingly enough, nobody challenged the data. One guy did, David King. He challenged the data, and then enough scholars around him said, look at what he's got. And you can actually, it's based on Google Earth, the maps, because we use that, and they, to illustrate, okay? The data we visited, okay? But to do the maps, we use Google Earth, and so this is all based on Google Earth. But you click on one of those dots, it'll zoom you right down, and you look right at the mosque, and all we did is put in the direction of the mosque faces, and you can see the line. We went and measured it. What's the Qibla direction? And then you can just sit in group and look at them. We didn't interpret this. It's like, there it is. And look at these. And so the data has never been challenged. Outside of Dr. King at the beginning, who said, oh, this is all foolishness. This is crazy. It can't be true. And then after a while, and he said, you must have toyed with the data. Enough people have looked at it to come back and say, okay, you didn't toy with the data. There's got to be another explanation, And so if we get that far, we'll get his explanation. Keep going. How could this happen? So now we're going into some interpretation of history and understanding history. So how could it happen? There was the first civil war in Islam, and if you look at the date, it's 29 AH. So can you parallel this in your mind for Christians who are here? 29 years after Jesus dies, the Christians have a civil war. It's Peter fighting Paul or something. Okay, so here's 29 years after Muhammad moves to Medina. They have a civil war because Muhammad has died, and now there's a war over who will succeed him, and so they're fighting against each other. This is where the Shia and the Sunnis begin their split in Islam, right back at the beginning. And so they're fighting over who's going to be the leader. When the leader comes of the Sunnis, he decides to make the capital in Damascus. He doesn't pick Mecca, doesn't pick Medina, doesn't pick Jerusalem. He goes to Damascus, a secular city, and that's where he sets up his capital. That makes people very unhappy, and so actually that's when the Second Civil War starts. And so there's a fight. Now, I'm going to give this story very quick. There's a guy by the name of, let's not go with him right away. First of all, there's a push at this time across North Africa, and the fighting has been stalled after this. This is after the Second World War. Abu al-Muhajir Dinar, he's a slave from Cairo, but he was quite high position. He was appointed to be the general in the west, but he had to remove Uqba bin Nafi al-Quraysh from the Quraysh, and Dinar goes out there he's replacing the general in charge of the army because the army's not doing well enough, and they send him out. But they tell him, just be nice to the guy, the general. Well, he goes out there and he puts him in chains, and then he starts getting the army moving again. And so he gets very happy and moving the army, and they're moving now across North Africa. And the caliph hears about this and says, send Uqba back here to Damascus. So Uqba gets sent back, and before he leaves, Uqba says, I'm coming back. I'm going to come back with an army, and I'm going to throw you into chains. So sure enough, he goes over to Damascus, and they give him soldiers and send him back. So now you have two generals, not happy, and he does that. He takes over. He's the new general. And so we have this Dinar, and he is imprisoned, and he's actually shackled to the first guy, the guy who comes back, the general says, I'm going to shackle you to me. Wherever I go, you will be there and you'll watch me and I'll know where you are or whatever. Well, this guy, Dinar, had started building his own mosque. All of these guys did. When you took a big city, you put up a mosque, and it's your mosque. And so he began to build a mosque. And that mosque, we're going to look at this later, but I'm going to just do this. That mosque there, it faced Petra, facing this way. He decided not to do that. And he didn't like Damascus, so he faced his mosque 90 degrees south. And that's what they've been doing ever since in North Africa. And in fact, what he did is he built, I use the British word, the latrines, the bathrooms, between him and Damascus. So, this whole mosque was shifted, and so they started using the other wall as the mosque wall, and he had wanted nothing to do. And so eventually there becomes a split between the Abbasids and the Umayyads, and so they continue on building their mosques for hundreds of years, facing in that same direction. It's roughly 150 degrees facing south. And so all these mosques that are similar to that. Let's keep going. So, next one. Oh yeah, there's the mosque. Oh, you can go back one. That's just to show you that it used to face Petra in that direction, then they started facing south, and the latrines built up there. Okay, keep going. Very quickly, how could this happen? The Names of Petra is a paper I've been working on with several other scholars, because the city of Petra, we know it as Petra. That was not its ancient name. That's what we call it today. And it has been called Petra at times down through history. Who can tell me, how good is your Greek? What does Petra mean? Rock. Okay, so it means rock. Okay, you Arabic speakers, what is rock in Arabic? Okay, a stone or a rock? A big rock, like mountain? Sakhar, okay. So, what you've got here is it means rock. And we have this. So when you say, talk about the city, you can talk about the rock. Okay, so it's just a name that was given to it. And it's called Hadrian's Rock because Hadrian was there at one time, the Roman general. So there was also a name, Petria was the name of the province, and it means two rocks. It's the province of two rocks. So that becomes interesting. Where's the second rock? Second rock is also called Sela. And so Sela, it means rock, but there's two rocks there. And so there's a misunderstanding that Petra is Sela in the Bible, and it's not. Sela is a separate place. They're about 40 kilometers apart. And so you can go see Sela or you can go and see Petra. They're two different places. As we looked at names, there's the name of Becca shows up there. Rechem is the oldest name. It's the name of a king in the Bible, but it was the city called Rechem. There's even written on rocks around Petra. It was known as Rechem originally. And we found references calling that city Mecca. Very interesting. It was known as Mecca. And there's a number of writers who talk about Islam started in the city of Mecca, that is in the mountains in Paran, and the description of it takes you right back here to Petra. Now, it's also interesting because there's something called the Petra Scrolls, and there's a number of scrolls found in Petra right during the time that Muhammad was a young man. They were written. So we have writing from that time period. Now, they're not histories, they're just legal documents. But in the legal documents, what do they call the city? They call it the blessed city. They call it the noble city. They call it the mother of all settlements. Wait a minute. These are all terms in Arabic that are used for Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And it's the blessed, and it's the noble, and it is Qur'an, the mother of all settlements. And so these are direct translations from the titles that were given to the ancient city of Petra. So actually have names of both places. Now, do you ever know of a place that has two locations? Well, we live in Canada. There are so many of them that are here and are somewhere else in the world. And so here we have a place where there were two places. And so this city, and so we went to Petra to look at Petra. Let's keep going here. How could this happen? So when the capital moved, the Second Civil War started. There was a man there who, Ibn Zubair, he was made to the caliph. He didn't choose it. Everybody wanted to him say, you be the caliph and we'll have the capital city here. And so now there were two caliphs, and then they started fighting. And then a man was sent down, General Hajjaj. If we make a film about this, this is the man we're going to make the film about, because his name kept coming up all the way through from now on. He was hugely influential in Islamic history, more than people recognize. And we all went back, everything we have in the book goes back to early documents. We go back to look at things that were written. We quote the Islamic writers from the 3rd and 4th centuries who record this. So I believe at that point, during that war, the Kaaba, which was in Petra, was destroyed. The Black Rock was then moved to get it as far away from Damascus as they could. Where did they take it? Down into Saudi Arabia. And now we have a shrine appearing in Saudi Arabia, and the Black Rock is there. And we have no references of this previous to this time. Let's go to the next slide. Here's an inscription. It's found in Saudi Arabia, and it goes back. It contains the full Shahada. There is no God but God. Muhammad is his prophet, and so forth. It says at the end, written in the year that Masjid al-Haram was built, the year 78 after the Hijrah. And so I've had Muslims say, this has got to be rebuilt. It's got to be, this was rebuilt. And it's like, no, it says it right here. They built Masjid al-Haram in Saudi Arabia in the year 78 after the Hijrah. And we have no record of anything like that. Before that, it was all facing towards Petra in southern Jordan. So there is inscription evidence that's there. This is when they moved the rock and when they built it there. And then they began to rename things. In the original city of Mecca, if you read this, that's what they're calling it, the first Mecca, there were 10 wells. One of the wells was a well called Zamzam. But there were 10 wells in that city. You go there now, look at the 10, well, there, you start identifying some of these wells that are there in Petra. You get to Mecca, there's only one well. There was one well in the middle of that valley. They didn't move the well, they just renamed it. And I can imagine, you know, they've got the black rock there, and then people start saying, oh, did you know the black rock's over there, you know? Oh, well, we should go see it. So suddenly you got a little pilgrimage started, right? People all going to see this. This is the most prayed at thing, you know, by Arabs for a long time, and so they go there, and so, whoa, what well is this? Well, this is Zamzam. I can just see somebody saying that. Oh, yeah, this is Zamzam, you know. And after a while, it's like, oh, these two big rocks that are here, these are the mountain of Marwa and Safa. You know, well, you come to Petra, and if you look to see where we've identified Marwa and Safa, they're huge mountains. And it's just like they say, there's the gates, and you've got the steps going up to where the idols were on them. They fit all the descriptions that are written there, but somebody just moved these things by name over. And so we've tracked down the pilgrimage. It's very interesting. The pilgrimage in Petra is exactly kilometer for kilometer the same distance as what's in Mecca. It's staggering how beautiful, how big, how, you know, the mountain of Arafat is incredible. And if you go part way up, I mean, there's so much evidence. You go in here, you'll just see all this stuff that we found, you know. Things, in just this last summer, we were out there, and I said to my two sons who were going to go up to the top of this mountain, I said, you know, it says in the records here that at a certain point, they began to put up lights at night that are going up the mountain so that people could come down, because they're supposed to come down in the dark after they were up there all day facing the sunset. So I said, there's got to be places where there were markers, you know, like where they put big lamps in. They went up there, and on the way up, they said, we found, once you get 3/4 of the way up, they said, there they are. There are holes square cut into the ground every, like, I don't know, 30 feet or something, where they put torches in the ground. And there they stand, all of them there along the way. I said, hey, another little piece. It's all these little pieces you're trying to put together to get the picture. So let's keep going. So we're saying, how could this happen? Keep another click. Okay, so there's that inscription. But Hajjaj becomes, he's sent down to fight the civil war. He's sent from Damascus, and he crushes the city. They say, don't shed blood, don't do bloodshed and everything in the holy place. He goes down there. He kills people. He sets up a catapult. He smashes the Kaaba building and everything else. When you come to Petra, all of that fighting makes sense. You can go and look at where the catapults got up close. You can look at where we believe the Kaaba was. The foundation of it is still there. You can go look at the catapult stones that they found lying there. You know, like, and I'm talking to the archaeologists, they said, we don't know when a battle took place, but sometime in early Islam, a battle took place, and we can't fit it into history because they're in Petra and they know nothing about, you know, calling it Mecca, and so they're trying to figure this out. And I'm like, I think I know when this battle took place. I think Hajjaj was here in this spot, and this is where it took place. And so we began to fit this together. Hajjaj then, he does the pilgrimage in full armor riding on the back of a horse. I mean, that's disgraceful in Islam. I mean, he rode up on top of the Kaaba, built the ruins that were there, and then he rode up to the top of the mountain and did. I mean, he really was a disgrace to Islam if you read the records. Yet today, people try to make him into a hero in Islam, but he then went on to Medina because there were rebellions popping up everywhere, and the caliphs liked him because he was their axeman. He was the strong guy. And if there was a rebellion, send in him, and he will put it down. He will straighten everybody up, and wherever he went. So they say that during his lifetime, and this is coming from the early writers of Islam, that he killed over 1 million men, and 120,000 of them with his personal hand or by his personal command killed this guy. But over 1 million died because of the fighting that he was involved in. And he persecuted the companions of the prophet. They didn't like what he was doing, and so first of all, he said, then we'll put a lead thing around your neck, and this is the sign that you're under dhimmi, you have to pay the taxes or whatever, like you're a non-Muslim. These are the companions of the Prophet. The Prophet's dead, but these are the guys who lived during the time and knew him personally. And 4 of them protested enough that he had him put to death. And so in Islamic history, as you read, you begin to talk, it talks about the reformers and the conservative. What is the right word? Is it my mind goes blank. No, there's the reformers and the traditionalists. That's the word I want. So the traditionalists are the old class, and the reformers are these guys who came along and reformed Islam at this time. And so he's the guy we're going to point at. Keep going. Okay, any questions about historical background? We need to move. I'm getting late here, so let's go. Now, we're not going to go through all these. In the books, we talk about supporting arguments, and we just have tons and tons and tons of these little supporting arguments. Some of these arguments started out as arguments against us, but we look at them and realize, oh, no, this is in our favor if you go back and study it. Beside all these things that we've listed, many of them were in the film. I'm going to run over to the original pilgrimage, and let's look at the Kaaba building. That's next. So let's jump over. The Kaaba, this is the one in Mecca. Notice it has a low, curved, round wall attached to it. Okay, and then there's this square building, and we have the size of it, and in the side of the building, the black rock is in the side. And people go there. That's the focal point of Islam. Next slide. Okay, we have a couple things to look at here. I don't know how well you can see this. On my right, I guess it's on your right, you can see a satellite view, and we've marked where some of these places are. So there is the Temple of Dushara, and we point out how Dushara is a title for the god Hubal, and so that's Hubal's temple. And right above it is what we believe was the Kaaba. And if you look at the bottom, we've looked at the sides of it. Now, if notice, there's so much information here. If you look at, is it on there? Yeah, there's a wall. And right in the middle in the bottom, you can see I put a line around the courtyard where the Kaaba building was in on the left-hand side. And if you go there, you can see this big curved wall. And they had to curve the wall around because that's where Hagar and Ishmael were buried. And so the wall came down and went around their graves and continued on. And so what you have in Islam is down the road a ways, in Islamic history, you have one of the caliphs who then says he attached the Hatim wall, this curved wall, to the Kaaba building. So when you go look in Mecca today, you see that it's attached to the Kaaba building. But originally in Petra, the Kaaba, the Hatim wall was separated from the Kaaba. If you look at the sides and reverse, one is upside down from the other. Recognize in Petra we have steps going up the side. Don't count the steps, just look at the altar that's there and look at the other one. They are virtually the same size. And if you go to Petra, Petra is all ruined because they've smashed it all down. The corner where the black rock should have been has all been smashed out. So I mean, but you go back and look at it and we say, that's the original Kaaba, and it fits the right place. It fits all the descriptions. You have the temples, the ancient temples are there, temple to Allah, temple to Dushara. All these things are mentioned in the Qur'an and in the Hadiths, and they're all in place in the city of Petra. So as we look back, we see this was the first Kaaba, and every mosque in the Muslim world faced this place. So it's fascinating to look at. Let's keep going. Okay, we're back on that list. We're going to jump down now to the language of Petra. I want to talk a little bit about the language. Okay, just start off with a guy here. Duri is his last name. And Mark Duri has become a very good friend of mine. I actually flew to Australia to talk with him and stuff. He's a linguist. He went into Indonesia, out to some of the tribes with a linguistic degree to actually put their writings, their speaking into language and then translate the scriptures for them and things like that. He then got interested in Islamic history, and as a linguist, he started looking at this, and he said, all down through Islamic history, there are Muslim scholars who have tried to find where did the Qur'an originate? Because the language in the Qur'an is different from the language that people talk. When I was in the Gulf, I'm hearing Gulf Arabic. Oh my goodness, these people talk differently. And down in Yemen, oh my, every village talked differently down in Yemen. It was so, they all have their own dialects. So where is the origin? And they have for 1,000 years searched all across the Middle East and never found the origin of the language used in the Qur'an. So where did it come from? What's the origin? And as he looked at this, when the Petra scrolls were found, they're written in Greek because Byzantines recorded all their stuff in Greek. And so, but as you read through, and I had fun, it cost me $600 to get a copy of them. I mean, it's actually 8 books or something, and they've got every page is photographed and everything's been worked on and went through that. It's fascinating because they use similar Arab for the names of things. They would call a house al-Bayt. And, they would, you have all the, they would describe where things were. You realize they're talking Arabic, but they're writing it in Greek. But all the names and places that were written in Arabic are all using terms that are synonymous to the terms used in the Quran. And so now we have scholars saying the earliest form of Arabic that we have comes from the city of Petra. Now, it's no surprise to us because we were looking at the mosques and that's where they all face, but now they're coming out and saying Petra is where the Qur'an originated. Let's keep going. Now, there is an interesting thing with the Qur'an, and a number of scholars have really books are just coming out now on this. I've picked one book to put it up here, and it's about the language of the Qur'an. And the Qur'an dates back, but the problem is suddenly the Qur'an is written in Arabic, and it's all there with all the language and everything, and it's like, but how did it get into this form? We have no written forms of Arabic before that. Suddenly we have the complete book with everything in it. And so they've tried to piece that together. One of these scholars went back reading the Qur'an, and he looked at it, and then he decided he recognized many of the things in the Qur'an as Aramaic. And he's like, there's some Aramaic roots to the Qur'an and to the language that was used. So he began to look at that and put that together. So looking at the Petra scrolls, let's go to the next one, just so I can jump in on this. I'm trying to figure out where to go. So I'm going to go to the next one. I hope that's where I want. Yes, okay, let's do this one. Okay, in Arabic, there's 3 levels of Arabic writing. There's something called the rasm. The rasm is when they write that curly script that's going across. That's rasm. There's no dots, there's nothing on it. So if you know Arabic, when you make a little dot in the line, not niche or whatever, up and down, that could either be a noon if the dot's on top, it could be ba if the dot's underneath, if it's 2 dots, it's a ta, and it could be a ya. It could be lots of things. Rasm doesn't have any markings whatsoever. So when you start putting those dots in, now it's called unvowel text, but it's got the dots. And then the 3rd level of it is its vowel text. And when people read the Quran today, all the little dashes and all the, whatever you want to call it, harika, everything's all put into there. So it's very interesting when they find the earliest Qurans written in rasm, no dots whatsoever. And Aramaic scholars come along and say, oh, we can read that. That's how you write Aramaic. And so they began to read the rasm text before anybody added any dots. Now, it is believed that Al-Hajjaj decided, he talked to the Caliph, and they decided they needed to make the language of the Muslim empire Arabic. Because up till his time, all the scribes that wrote anything down in the courts or in legal cases all wrote it down in Greek. And they were all Christians. The schools were Christian schools. And so when because remember the first guys, they come in, they're Bedouin from the desert, and they're maybe merchants or whatever, but they're taking over all this area, and they needed scribes, and they didn't come in and dismantle the governments. They came in and used the civil servants. It's like in North America. When we have an election, we replace the guys at the top. Civil servants are the same civil servants for a long time. I remember talking with the American government one time with people at a certain level, and they said, no, what's his name? Biden just came into office. We don't know what he's going to tell us to do. But all the civil servants are all waiting to be told the new things, but they didn't all change. They're all there wait to see what new edicts come down and how they're supposed to do it. So they didn't change the civil servants. Civil servants still were recording everything in Greek, and they were using Byzantine coins because they hadn't minted their own. And so, this whole thing, the Caliph said, we need to write this in our own language. Because in Persia, they were writing their records in Persian. And so Hajjaj, who then became the Caliph of Persia, said, this doesn't work. We've got to do this also. He's the guy who introduced, we've got to put Arabic text everywhere. And so he started doing this and enforcing it. And then he came to the Qur'an. And he didn't like the Qur'an because it was very hard for people to read rasm. Because the Christians are reading it one way, and many Muslims were reading it. You can change ta and ba and ya, and you can do things to words. And so he decided we need to write a better version of the Qur'an. And so he put the dots in it. But he did the dots on the rasm. And so that means that he could take words and make them what he Arabized them. Because he's in the whole process of Arabizing everything else. He took and Arabized the Qur'an. And so there's some fascinating evidence of what he did. Let's keep going. See if I can sum of this up here. Okay. I'll give you an example. We'll just do this. And this is Aramaic text that was changed to Arabic. This is Surah 2, verses 259. And it's so hard to read because it's so far away from me. But it describes a man who doubts that God can raise the dead. And so as he's doubting that, God says, I'm going to make you die, and I'm going to bring you back to death 100 years later. And so God says, okay, it's 100 years later. He's like, what? And so then God says to them, and he says, note what it says, and look at the donkey that we may make these signs, make thee a sign for mankind. Look at the bones and how we set them up, then clothe them with flesh. When it became clear to him, he said, I know that God has power to do all things. I don't know if I can read that correctly. Yet when the Aramaic read the rasm text, it says here, if he's reading it, yet behold your condition and your state. There's no donkey on this, okay? And behold your perfection. And whatever we made of you, we make you an example to the people. Behold how we restore your bones and cover them with flesh. It makes more sense. And they're saying, no, this is Aramaic. And so what happened here, we have condition becomes food. And so in Arabic, you have the Arabic, I've used phonetics there to do it. And it's so far away, it's hard to read. Your state then becomes drink in Arabic, and your perfection becomes donkey. And so we have the one before, and we have the one that it got changed into when they Arabized the words. And so that's, fascinating to see this. Let's keep going. Now you've got Ibn Abu Dawood. Ibn Abu Dawood is the son of Abu Dawood who collected all the hadiths. He's famous because he's Sahih, he's the correct set of collection of hadiths. And so his son, this is in the year 275, the son of the famous hadith collector, he says, there was a man in the book of my father who said this also. It's talking about this change. And I asked my father, who is he? And he says this is the guy's name, and he says it on this authority. And he said that Al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf changed Uthman's Qur'an. And Ibn Dawood then provides a number of examples, and among them is this actual verse that we looked at in Surah chapter 2. And so here we have in Islamic records saying, along came this guy named Hajjaj, and he made changes in the Qur'an. Not just adding vowels, and making it a nice vowel text. He changed the meaning of it. So this is all in the book. So during during a period around this time, the Roman emperor started having correspondence with the leading caliph, and they exchanged correspondence comparing religions and accusing one another of things. Like you had this ongoing, letters going back. And in one of them, he writes, where am I here? Leo, this is the ruler of the Christians. He says, "As for your book, you have given already us examples of such falsifications, and one knows among others that a certain Hajjaj, named by you as governor of Persia, who had men gather up all the ancient books, which he replaced and composed by himself, according to his taste, that he has propagated everywhere in your nation, because it is easier by far to understand undertake such a task among people speaking the same language." And so that was when they were making this whole thing. Everybody has to speak. But he's saying somebody spoke Arabic. Let's keep going. Well, how do we close here? We have a few minutes. Okay, so we have a guy, Al-Kindi, and he's writing also a little bit after this. He said, "Then follows the business of Hajjaj bin Yusuf, who gathered together every single copy of the Qur'an that he could hold, and, that he..." Oh, that's a whole lot bigger. Okay, look at that. So, who gathered together every single copy of the Quran he could lay hold of, and caused to be omitted from the text a great many passages. Among these, they say, were verses revealed according to the house of Umayyad, with the names of certain, we don't know there, certain ones, and concerning the house of Abbas, also with names. 6 copies of the text, thus revised, were distributed to Egypt, Syria, Medina, Mecca, Kufa, and Busra. After that, he called in and destroyed all the preceding copies, even as Uthman had done before him. And a result of this is patent to those who have read the scriptures and see how in your books are all jumbled together and intermingled, and evidence that many different hands have been at work therein and caused discrepancies, adding or cutting or taking away what they disliked. So here's another writer saying this is what Hajjaj did. So now I have a problem as a historian, because I have mosques that are not facing the right direction. And I keep coming across accounts of people writing this 1,000 years ago, saying a guy named Ibn Hajjaj came along, and he also gathered up all the Qur'ans and destroyed them all except his version. How do you trust the history that people are saying today? This is the way it is. And they come to me and say, no, we know, because we're Muslims. We face Mecca and Saudi Arabia. And I'm going, I know you know that, but the stones don't say that. The archaeology doesn't show us that. It's really very different. So let's keep going. I just want to go. That was the, okay, well, we won't go through the rest of it. There's lots of different arguments. Now, there's been some opposing arguments. As we've come up with stuff, people have opposed this, and so we'll go very quickly. There's David A. King. Bless the Lord. I mean, bless him. I'm thankful for this guy. He came along. I actually was warned by one of his students who wrote me a couple of years before he started writing stuff. He said, "Did you know that Dr. King is ranting and raving about you in his classroom?" And saying, you're an idiot and you're stupid and you can't know what you know and you're saying foolish things. And of course, the Muslims knew how to, and knew their mosques and everything. And so he was really, really against me. And so he started writing papers and but he didn't attack the data, he attacked me, saying I'm unqualified and I can't do this. That's why we list all these writers and all these things and where you can find them and everything, because it has nothing to do with my degree. I'm like, well, so who went to university, got a degree in Qiblas? It's not even in Islamic universities you get a degree. So how do you become qualified? And he's the world expert on Qiblas in and finding directions, everything in the Middle Ages when they did mathematics. And so he's into, they had to know, different trigonometry, and they had to know different things that they worked at. It's like, yeah, they did all that 400 years later, but how did they do their mosques in the first 100 years? So his answer to everything is, it was all chance. He said, yeah, you're looking at all these and you're seeing patterns, but it's just chance. It's just chance that 64 happened to face Petra and 44 happened to face, in between, and these others. No, it's because, they went on pilgrimage and they were there and they saw some part of the Kaaba. Maybe they stood at one wall and they knew at night this star was up above. So they went back and said, okay, we're going to build a mosque. Oh, there's the star. And so these mosques all got facing in all different directions. That's his solution. So in effect, he is saying, as I turn around, God, and this is not quoting him, this is quoting our summary of him. God told Muhammad that every Muslim has a Qibla, but they couldn't figure out how to do it for the first 3 centuries of Islam. So the first rightly guided caliphs and the Umayyads that followed were stumbling around in the dark, trying their best to figure out what was the direction to pray towards. Because that's basically what he's saying. They just couldn't figure it out. Well, in the book, we have a whole chapter to tell you how they did it, because there are early guys who explained how they did it. And we haven't. And actually, do you know where I found that information? Reading Dr. King. And he quotes this, but he says, of course, it wasn't very accurate. And so but he never even tried it. He never even rebuilt the whole process they went through. And so, yeah, it does. As you get farther out, you get a few more degrees. If you go out to Morocco, that system doesn't work as good, or over in China, but in the center, it's very, very accurate. So anyway, to my surprise, a man jumped in, and I had no idea who he was. He just started writing papers, and then later I've talked to him, exchanged emails. I've never actually spoken with him, but we started to. His name is Dr. Walter Schum, and he had one of his students with him, and they tackled this whole idea of, is it chance? And they can work with statistics. Now, guys who are good in statistics, you can pull out all kinds of interesting information, but you have to have a good set of data. So his first question was, well, I need to examine your database, and we need to go through it. And so he did that, and then my database has been growing and changing. We're adding mosques. The last 2 or 3 weeks, we added 2 more mosques, just because somebody wrote. People are still writing in and saying, have you checked this one? Oh, this one doesn't seem to be in your database. So, okay. And my wife says, why don't you just add it? I'm like, it takes me a full day, at least 8 hours, because I've got to go and check every little piece, and then I've got to find the archaeological reports or other things. You've got to be sure that what you've got is what you've got and what you're saying. But anyway, he checked all the data. So when we did this book, he wrote a chapter for this book. If you like statistics, that's the chapter for you. If you don't like math and statistics, just have a look at it. Maybe read the conclusion and keep going on. So let's keep going. Another guy who wrote some arguments was Mark Anderson. It's very interesting. Mark Anderson and I worked very closely together for a number of years. I held Mark in high respect for many years because he has a master's degree in Islamics from McGill University and a master's in theology from Westminster, whatever it is, in Philadelphia. I think that's what it's called. So, he knows his stuff, and I was with him way back when I was, early 20s, when he would go debate imams and stuff in Toronto. So it was very interesting to watch. But he came along and said, I can't agree with you on this. He said, because the Muslims, the pagans were all sacrificing, and Muhammad was against their sacrificing. But there was an edict given by the Christian emperor that there were no pagan sacrifices were allowed in the Byzantine Empire. So therefore, it couldn't be there because there were sacrifices. So when we were working on this, Chad, who was working with me at this time, God really blessed me with this guy. He has a background he loves archaeology. He's done digs in the Middle East. He loves research. And he said, I'll take that on, So he went back to look. And yes, there was an edict. All pagan sacrifices are to stop. Didn't happen. So the next guy who came along created another edict, the next emperor, whatever they call him. And then the third guy after him had to decree it again. And even then, there's all kinds of mentions of cities and places where the pagans were continuing to do these sacrifices, despite the edict. And so we go through this argument and just say, this is a nice argument. It sounds really good, but when you go back and dig down into the history, it doesn't stand up. Let's keep going. Okay, one of the other arguments was about timeline. Where was the Roman army? Why didn't the Roman, if Muhammad was in Petra, and Petra was in the Byzantine Empire, when we dug into this, and Chad, again, he loves Roman history, he said, let me do this one. I said, okay, go ahead, do it. And so off he went. He came back, and we have this timeline. It's very hard a little bit for you to see it, but we've got Heraclius, who is the emperor, on one side, and Muhammad's timeline on the other. And it's very interesting that the Byzantines lost the Sassanid War at a certain point, and they were pushed out of Jordan, out of all the way up into Syria, and all the way up into Turkey. They retreated, and they lost Jerusalem, they lost Egypt, all of this stuff. It was pushed way back. When did this happen? Right during the time that Muhammad started preaching. So why did the Quraysh suddenly feel emboldened? Because the Quraysh are from Petra. Lots of Quraysh families around Petra. They've been there for centuries. If you want to find their roots, you go to Petra of all places, So, but I mean, they then felt emboldened. We can persecute Muhammad, who's there, and they persecute him, and so he flees down into Medina, and that's the whole beginning. But we just started putting all the points together, and it's like, this all makes sense. Even verses in the Qur'an where Muhammad is talking about, in a far country, they fought a war, but they're going to come back. I mean, all the stuff that he puts in there just fits exactly when this happened. And so we can put these lines across and say there was a political vacuum around the city of Petra at this time. And so there was no Byzantine army. They were gone. The people there had freedom to go do things. And so it's very interesting putting those together. Let's keep going. One of the arguments, and this was very fascinating, we found, was about Abraha, the guy named Abraha from Yemen, and he marched up and he fought at Mecca, and he took Mecca with his elephant. Now, the stories are fun when you go to read them, because by about 400 AD, they had become multiple elephants, an army of elephants, and so forth. So when we come along and say, no, this was in Petra, I mean, how does he get an elephant from Yemen up to Petra, walking across the desert? And there's a simple answer. You're not going to like the answer. It's global warming. The world has been warming and cooling for centuries. I was just telling my host the other day that it's really exciting for archaeologists, because in Switzerland, a glacier that was there is retreating. And as it retreats, a Roman road is being uncovered. Now, put that in your head and figure that out for a minute. It's like, okay. I mean, ice has come and retreated and gone back. We've gone through cold and warming. We don't have enough information, and we're not going to talk about global warming. I'm not a global warming denier at all. Yes, we're warming up. The question is why and how and cycles and all kinds of things. If you really want to get into global warming, learn about underwater volcanoes. Because there are scientists out there who said, you guys are crazy, because we can tell you when El Niños happen, because that's when the volcanoes erupt under the water, heat all the water up, and change the currents. It's like, But a lot of scientists aren't listening to other scientists. That's one of the problems that are out there. And so you get out and you publish in some journal, and if other people don't read your journal, they've never heard of it, but if they're the world experts, like Dr. King, I've never heard of this, therefore it's wrong, and therefore anyway. And you go to Arabia, and we've got lots of examples of these villages and cities and towns that were out where it's desert now, but at that time they were grassland. It's like savanna, you would call it in Africa. And so they're there, and then as the desert grew, and the biggest desertification in Arabia happened about 100 years into Islamic history. And so all these villages packed up and left. Young men went off and joined the army, and because they were leaving Arabia. So you have this big desert there. It wasn't always like that. And so you can't go and say the deserts were always like this. It wasn't. You have to go back and look at the history to see what was going on there at the time. That's why we're so interested in when scientists dig up the early soils and they go through and look at the seeds that are in there, and especially when they dig up graves. That's why I really don't like grave robbers, and they're all over the Middle East, is they disturb the soil, and now you can't check the soil for what was there in that soil before. But if you get a grave and they dig down, often they have coins on the eyes of the person. That's what the grave robbers are after, 2 little coins. But they get down there, but then if you can get that soil that was thrown in there when the person died, you have got soil, and you can date it very closely to when those coins were there. So we can do a lot. So these opposing arguments, a lot of them are made not understanding the climate and the climate change that has taken place. Let's keep going. So, another one of these, what time have we got? This is the Battle of Petra. We won't get into that. Let's keep going. China was one, because we've got a mosque in China that faces Petra, and Dr. King went crazy. He said, what? They were on flying carpets? How did they get that? I don't know if he's nodding, but did you read some of that? Yeah, I mean, Dr. King is an amazing guy, but I just let him go. I didn't want to refute him stuff because it was attacking me personally and making fun of everything, and that became popular. So you go on the website, you'll see lots of people who just make fun and laugh. Dan Gibson, ha, 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 whatever, and Dr. King started this, and so we took him apart. And Chad wrote a chapter on him. He said, I'll take this on because, he is attacking you, so I can have a neutral voice in the middle, and it's a very interesting, well-read chapter. But it's so interesting because I didn't know anything about these connections. Back when I was early on doing this, I was contacted, I won't get into this whole story, by some folks in China, and they flew me out for things that I was studying about culture and history and other things at the time. I was out in China. I said, I will come on one condition, because they were meeting in Canton, in Guangzhou, it's called. And so I said, I will go on one condition. I get one free afternoon, and you give me somebody to translate, and I can go around the city. And they said, oh, yeah, that's easy. That's it? And I said, that's it. And so they had one free afternoon. I could go visit these early mosques. And we traced out the history. God is good, because I'm in the middle of this study. I get an email from a guy, and he's actually a Canadian, but he's living in Australia. And he is translating ancient Chinese texts about explorers that leave China and explore the Western world and go home and write. And here's a chart. You've got somebody in 90 BC, another explorer in 100, another explorer 450, another explorer. So the date is when it's written, and this is the events they're referring to on the right. So we have explorers that came out, and he said, you're the geography guy. He said, help me find these spots. And so I was excited to go out in the desert. It gives me always an excuse to go out driving in the desert, and to find these spots and to find the trade routes, or there were paths here and how they moved and what these places were. And so I had a lot of fun with them, and still do to this day. So I was introduced to the China connection at the very beginning of this study, 20 years ago. Charts in the book, charts on the website. You can get it for free. It's all there. But you can also take a picture. That's fine. Let's keep going. This is an interesting. We'll just do this, and then we're going to go to the closing. Saudi Arabia, there was a city called Taif. Taif was beside ancient Mecca. And all the way back to the very first stories, Mecca and Taif were together. So when they moved the Black Rock down to Saudi Arabia, how did Taif get there? I mean, it was a thorn in the side, you can move a black rock, but how does the whole city get moved? Let's click on, I think. Okay. I had the description of Taif, and when I read it, I said, I know where that place is. It's in Jordan. The description is perfect. Taif means surrounded by, and here was a city that was in an area, this rock, a giant mountain all the way around. The top right is where it is today. There's a village there, and you can see the ancient town was on the left, And so there actually was a wall underneath where that road is. We've got a whole thing there. Keep going. Next. No, let's go back. So I better read it over here. So there's a number of them. I just chose one of these. This is some of the ancient writings of the Muslims. And so it talks about when Allah placed the sanctuary, he moved Al-Ta'if to it from Asham. And then Abdul Rahman, this guy here, Ibn Mutim, had said, I have heard Al-Zuhri saying, Allah the Mighty moved a town from Asham and placed it at Al-Ta'if to answer the supplication of Ibrahim so far, who said to provide the people with fruit. They actually did move the town. That's what it says. But they just moved the people. All the people got up from there and followed the Black Rock, eventually went down there, found a place where they could grow agriculture, and it's known as Taif to today. But when you read it, all the descriptions, the temples, everything what was there, it's not down in Saudi Arabia, it's all up in Jordan. So a lot of people say, oh, you couldn't move Taif. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I've got several examples of when they said that Taif moved. So it was in the north, Sham is in the north, and it moved down to where it was near the sanctuary. Let's go, I'm just going to keep clicking. We talked about Zamzam, keep moving. We're not going to do Makaraba, the ancient maps. Keep going, because we're running out of time. Okay, keep going. Oh, yeah. Now we're going to look at my conclusion, because we have 4 minutes. Okay, what does traditional Islam teach? And it teaches the date is 570, and this is, okay, and the place was in Mecca, and Muhammad was born, started preaching, and then he emigrated north to Medina, and Islam came into power in Medina, and the first 4 caliphs lived at Mecca or Medina. Okay, that's traditional Islam. What am I saying? Push, there we go. I'm saying 570 AD. I'm not changing the date. A lot of people are saying, oh, Muhammad didn't exist and all kinds of things. We can talk about that, but I think he did. But if you're putting him in Mecca and Saudi Arabia, no, he didn't exist down there. You've got to put him up in the correct context. But I say the place then is Petra. And Muhammad was born, he started preaching in Petra. He emigrated south down to Medina, and Islam came into being in Medina. The first 4 caliphs lived in Petra, not down in the south. The Black Stone was moved down about 70 after the Hijrah during this war. So I'm not changing a lot, but I'm looking at archaeology and I'm saying this is what archaeology tells me. And all the data seems to point. Let's go one more. So traditional Islam tells us that all prayers must be directed to Mecca, that's the Qibla, and the pilgrimage once a lifetime must be made to Mecca. Halal food, you have to face towards Mecca to make it halal when you butcher. Trust your Islamic teachers, they know best. And this is a big thing in Islam. Just trust your teachers, they know best. And so that's what you're told. And also, traditional Islam says the Qur'an was revealed by an angel direct from God. And Muslims say you can understand God's will and understand God and his will from the pages of the Qur'an. This would be a typical approach that Muslims have. What am I saying? I am saying the first prayers were directed to Petra, and we have all these mosques, where the pilgrimage was made to Petra, and that halal food, they should be facing Petra, but they're not. And Islamic teachers are just repeating what they've been told over and over again. And I believe the Quran underwent development over a 100-year period until it was solidified by Hajjaj. And that's what history is telling me. And so we don't have any copies of it in that first 100 to 200 years because it went on. And so there are bits and pieces. There's lots and lots of scraps of Qurans. It's very interesting as they're going through them and putting things together, trying to understand the development of the Quran until it was solidified down. It's a proper word for that. And then the original text and the meaning of the Quran have been lost. Because there is no surviving early Quran. Before, people meddled with it. And we know Hajjaj did, and we know during Uthman's time they did, and through other, they collected and destroyed. The problem is they destroyed everything before it. And then, collected and did things. And so We are at a place today where, as a historian, I can't say, show me a Qur'an you trust that wasn't meddled in by somebody, that they didn't do something with. So that's where we're at. One more. Oh, let's not do that. Oh, okay, I'm going to just do this very quickly because I have a minute. Archaeology also challenges Christians. Did you know that? All of you are being challenged by the things that archaeologists are saying about Christianity. And a lot of it is because of our expectations as Christians. Our expectations are wrong. We have been influenced by artists. I remember growing up and seeing pictures. So there is Solomon talking in his palace, and there is Solomon praying in the temple. Now, how big are those columns behind Solomon? How big do you think they are? They're massive. I mean, look at that crowd. It gets smaller and smaller, those little heads. I mean, those columns are like huge. Even in the palace, so forth. Look at the size of the columns. Like, well, why does the artist do that? Because he's making Solomon into a great king. Now, I'm going to challenge you, because I know in this crowd are people who read their Bibles. I mean, I read my Bible every day. And we gather our family together and we read through it. It takes us about 1.5 to 2 years to read through a chapter every day going through the Bible. We've done that for many years. When I was helping my son get ready to he was going to Bible college in New Zealand, he had one of the questions, have you ever read the Bible? He said, how do I answer this? I said, well, it's a yes. He has Asperger's, so everything's black and white. So it's like, I said, it's a yes and no question. And he said, yeah, but he said, I've read it 3 times a year since I was about 12 years old, and now he's about 20. And I'm like, good for you. He's been having his devotions and been reading. He knows his Bible. He knows it backwards and forwards. And so we have so much fun as a family when we read through because we're trying to figure out what it says. I'll challenge you to go back and read the book of Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and into Chronicles and 1st, 2nd Chronicles, and tell me how many times the idea of tents come up. You remember the lady who's in their tent and the ruler comes running in. She takes a tent peg and puts it through him. So where was she living? In a tent. I mean, where did Abraham live? In a tent. When they moved down to Egypt, where did they live? They lived out in the land of Goshen, looked after animals. Where do you think they lived? In tents. Did you ever think when they left Egypt, I mean, where did they get overnight all these tents so they could go tenting in the desert? They all had tents. They just took them and left on the Exodus, took their tents up. And then as you read through, they're in the land going through Judges. Where does where does Deborah judge the nations from? Under a tree. Okay? When I was out with the Bedouin, I eventually said, just read this book and tell me what it says to you. And they were looking through going, these are Bedouin. These guys, everything just it's got tent life all the way through. David is now taking over the kingdom. He wants to build he wants a city for a capital city. What city does he choose? Jerusalem wasn't even in his land. Why didn't he choose a city in Judea? Because there were none big enough or great enough to make his. He had to take it from the Jebusites, and that became Jerusalem. But he didn't have a city. Go read the stories of Solomon. Solomon starts building places to put his horses because, there's no cities for them. And then you read after Solomon dies, and they all meet together and have that big thing with Jeroboam and Rehoboam, and they're all discussing. And then everybody gets angry, and they all go, okay, everybody back to your tents. And you see how many times do they say, go back to our tents. See, we have an idea that this was a huge, glorious kingdom, but I've learned, because we were out there, and I said, and I challenged people out there, even students come out, other archaeology students, others. I said, okay, I'm going to take you to a place where last year the Arabs were tenting, and I want you to find me some archaeological evidence that they were there. Pretty hard, because they get out there and there's not much. Whatever they happen to leave behind is just disintegrated. Okay, so we have an idea that David built a great kingdom with palaces and huge houses. He built a house of wood. He lived in the forest of a house of wood. So how many of you live in a house of wood? Okay, so I mean, just think about it, I mean, for a bit. We make them into a huge nation because of the pictures. They were a huge nation, but most of the people lived in tents. So the archaeologists go back and say, there's no evidence of King David or King Solomon because we can't find any civilization at that time. And I said, that's absolute evidence that they existed. If you were finding a big civilization, that's not them because they were nomads. They were told to go into the land and what? Destroy and burn every house and every city and everything. That's what they did. They weren't quick to rebuild. And when they did, you can go back and look at those from those ages, and they're small. They put houses around in a circle. So you had maybe 10 or 15 houses in a circle. That was a town. It wasn't very big. And, so we have got expectations, and then we get upset when the archaeologist says there's no evidence for them. Because they're expecting what we were expecting. David was there, and they're finding his house, and they're putting things together. But they're disappointed because they weren't reading much Bible. They were probably going through looking at the pictures like we did growing up. And I meet some of these guys who went to an Anglican church and never read their Bibles, but as kids, they looked at all the pictures. They got all the pictures in the study. That's what they remember. And then they go over there, and so then they go, archaeology, it's not there. So a new one that's just come out, they can find no evidence of the worship of Jehovah God after King Solomon's time. So let me ask you, what do you think they're looking for? They find evidence of Baal worship because there were household gods all over. So lots of little Baals, lots of little Asherahs, lots of other little idols. But there's no evidence of Jehovah God. Well, what would you expect to find? What did they have? They had a temple in Jerusalem. And what happened to that temple? Completely destroyed. Even the rocks taken apart. So there's no temple. So what would you have in your house? Maybe some scrolls of like some of Moses or some of something, How long will a scroll last? You go looking back thousands of years, very hard to find things going back that far. Dead Sea Scrolls, well, but they're dating a little bit later, but they're looking, but yeah. But if you're looking for Jehovah God, they're not finding him, and it's like, that's exactly, you go back and read your Bible. The prophets are all complaining. You guys have left the worship of Jehovah God. Some of you still go up and worship there, but you worship all these other gods at the same time. And so they're down there looking in archaeology, and what are they finding? All these other gods. Exactly what my Bible says. But the expectation they have is different. And so for Muslims, they go back, they too have expectations. It should be this way. Everybody should be facing Mecca. That's their expectation. But then they're finding out expectation isn't right. It doesn't line up. And so we need to be careful as Christians, as we look, to say, what exactly does our book tell us? And then I believe you can trust in the Bible. Because I go back, it's all coming, it's all there. You can go back and look, bits and pieces are there. But you have to look at what the book says happened, not imagine a story that took place. Okay. I am done. We're going to go to questions. So I'm going to ask our guy to turn off the video recording.